Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another excellent episode of OP Radio. I am your host, Mac. Super excited for today's episode. I hope you all listening are having another excellent day. Hope you're closer to achieving those goals that you're working on, whatever they may be. Just remember, one foot in front of the other, and soon enough, you'll attain them. We've got another great episode lined up for you today. I'm joined by a couple special guests. So let's quickly go around and have everybody just introduce themselves. Speaking of getting shit done, I'm joined with a colleague of mine, a fellow optimist, a colleague at OP Labs. Zain, how you doing this morning?
Howdy, Mac. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Zain. I'm on the team here at OP Labs, focused on ecosystem development, and super stoked to be chatting with y'all today.
Awesome. Thank you, Zain. And I think next up, let's have Steve introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Dakh, Chief Technical Officer of Ethereum Attestation Service.
Thank you.
And full stack dev.
Thank you, Steve. And lastly, Mr. Bryce. How you doing this morning?
Good. Hey, thanks, Mac. So this is Bryce. First, thank you, Mac and Zain, for hosting us on OP Radio. Really stoked for this. Can't thank Mac enough just on how well organized this whole process was getting set up compared to some of the other podcasts. So first, thank you for. I lead all products and essentially everything not related to dev, but excited to be here. Excited for this episode. Thanks again.
Thank you, Bryce. Thank you so much. And we're glad to have you here. This conversation is going to be mostly between me and Steve, but Zain and Bryce, please, if at any time you have anything to add, do not be afraid to interrupt. Would love to hear from you. Okay, so let's get right into it. First, before we kind of get into EAS and what is EAS, I actually am just super curious about, Steve, your personal background and your history with Ethereum.
So I started programming really young, when I was 6 years old, actually. And I've just been really passionate about like building things and learning things. And I actually got into crypto the first time in 2011. I started mining Bitcoin around then when I first heard about it. And I built some of the like early Bitcoin wallets in 2013. Actually, like the first Bitcoin wallet in a browser. So like the first Chrome extension wallet, CryptoKit, built in 2013. And funnily enough, Vitalik was one of the advisors for it. And in December 2013, when we were presenting CryptoKit, Vitalik actually told me about Ethereum. That's when I first heard about Ethereum. Vitalik told it to me actually in a hot tub. I know it sounds weird, but that's what happened. And the next month I was at the Ethereum house at the founding. And so my start with Ethereum was pretty early. And since then, I've just been building various open source software in blockchain mostly. And I was really interested in decentralized identity and reputation. And that was the inspiration for the Ethereum Attestation service.
Wow, 2013. So, Steve, you are definitely a crypto OG. I think you for sure qualify. And when are we going to see the has been in a hot tub with Vitalik attestation come on chain? I'm curious to see that.
That's we'll have to make a schema for that and try to get Vitalik to attest.
Yeah, that's a rare one. That's a very rare one.
That'll be a rare attestation for sure.
Okay, so thank you so much, Steve, for that. That was great. So let's get into what EAS is for those who aren't familiar. Can you give us sort of a broad overview, Steve, and then maybe we can get a little more granular as we go on?
Yeah, sure. So in general, EAS is a public good base layer infrastructure that allows any entity to attest about anything. And that might not be obvious why that's really valuable at first. And so it makes sense, I think, to tell you the story about like why we originally built it. It was actually built because as trying to solve the decentralized identity and reputation problem. Because right now in the digital world, how do you know who to trust? How do you know who someone is or whether someone's reputable if they're just hiding behind an address? There's really there have been like platforms in the space that have popped up over the years, identity platforms, and they don't seem to cut it because they all build these kind of siloed platforms that are not interoperable with each other. And it's just a real pain. For example, if you want to figure out where to get an identity made, for example, on chain, there's a ton of providers. They all do completely different things. They basically build their own smart contracts and tooling, and usually they're funded. And so basically all we have is all these like closed source competing identity platforms. And I was wondering, like, well, why has no one solved this yet? You know, what is it about identity that no one's figured out yet? And so I was really interested in this, and I was thinking, like, well, like what actually is identity? You know, what's my identity? You know, because I was trying to get back to first principles, because all the solutions that people have made, even though they're fragmented, but they're also, I didn't think any of them actually solved what identity is. Identity is like a very complex thing. And so I was thinking, well, what's my identity? What was my first identity? Because I mean, if if I have an identity now, at some point I had no identity. So I was thinking, well, when I was born, my mom named me Steve. She essentially attested to my name. And then I went to school, and the teachers attested to my grades. The kids in the class could have attested to whether they liked me, whether they trusted me or not, whether they thought I was cool. The government could attest to whether I have a driver's license or a passport. My employer could attest to whether or not I was a good employee or not. And so I realized actually you can represent identity pretty elegantly as an aggregate of attestations about someone. And so I realized if you want to be able to kind of solve this decentralized identity and reputation problem, you can't just build an identity platform. That's what all these other platforms are doing. They build an identity platform like that's completely siloed from everything else. And what these identity platforms are doing, they're essentially attesting to something about your identity. But these platforms, because they presuppose so much, they're very limited to what you can do with them. So we realized if you want to solve identity, what you actually need is a base layer where anybody can attest about anything. And that's the basic of what EAS is. It's an on-chain and off-chain protocol platform for being able to attest about anything, because identity is just such a complex thing. We had to figure out how to break identity down into its smallest like Lego blocks, and we found that attestations do this really well.
Yeah. Oh man, so interesting. So many interesting ways we could take this. Steve, I want to ask you about, from my perspective, it almost seems like an arms race, this identity arms race, because, if you've spent any amount of time on the internet, from my perspective, it almost seems like this problem of being able to prove you are who you say you are has gotten worse. It's like used to be there were certain practices you'd have, like you'd fill out a CAPTCHA so you could prove that you're not a bot. I'm curious from your perspective, working on this problem and being a programmer working in the internet and in crypto for so long, what's your sense of is this? It feels like to me like this problem has gotten worse, if anything, as it's gone on.
Yeah, absolutely. The problem is gotten worse, and it's only getting worse. So CAPTCHA right now, it works okay because there just hasn't been people are already training really good AIs to beat CAPTCHA, and so I suspect that within like the next year, like regular CAPTCHAs as we see them now won't even work. So like, how do you know whether someone's a bot or not? And especially now, like currently we have more human generated content than AI content, but like in the next few years, that's going to change. There's going to be an overwhelming majority of just AI content, and impossible to tell where anything came from, like what's the source. And so, we do have a solution for this. They're called digital signatures, and we've had them for a long time. It's just that there hasn't been for decades. Users have never had their own public private key pairs before, and so no one could actually really participate in this digital signature usage. The only people that have been using digital signatures mostly are like developers who are like holding a key pair to like SSH into a server, but in general no one's using it for logging into websites, right? We use passwords, which are another terrible security mechanism. And so EAS uses this digital signature technology that now everybody who uses, crypto, they have a public private key pair available, and being able to use that to be able to make these types of signatures it's way more useful. It's impossible to counterfeit. CAPTCHA can be broken, but you cannot break a digital signature that's signed with a private key. And so, yeah, to answer your question, it's going to get worse. And we need tools. We need really good tools that use digital signatures and have really good UX around them to help solve this problem.
100% agreed. And just as an example, yesterday I was trying to create a new Twitter profile, and I was introduced to a new CAPTCHA that I had never experienced before. And this thing, there were at least 7 steps to it, where I had to try to prove that I was a real person. And so it seems like instead of why I love EAS and why I love what the folks on this call are building is because it seems like instead of just the same old solution and we're gonna have a CAPTCHA, it's just going to be more complicated. You're actually approaching the problem from a completely different angle, which I think is just really promising. It's like how much further can we take these CAPTCHAs? It's like you're squeezing a rock and nothing's coming out.
Right, because we're assuming because CAPTCHAs can only be solved by intelligent beings, right? But now that we've made digital intelligence, AI that can solve this, that's no longer possible. We need better solutions, and digital signatures really are the only thing that we have. That's like our only weapon or our only defense in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many steps you can add to these CAPTCHAs, right? I mean, I think the AI can recognize which picture has the crosswalk at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the complex ones, the AIs will be able to do soon too. So it's a matter of time. So like, it's important to start moving fast to get people to adopt these. I actually bring up this concept. I've been bringing it up recently. Like, imagine in the near future, probably within the next couple of years, you're going to be able to use AI to make really convincing videos of, like, say, Hitler, a video of Hitler in like the 1940s, and making it look like he was a great guy. Like, look at him, he's actually such a great guy. All these other videos that are leading the military to kill Jews, that was all just fake. That's the AI. So how do you know? It's going to become even hard to tell whether historical content is authentic. So I think even now, like, we should start probably signing and attesting, on chain to, like, historical content before it becomes impossible to tell what's real or not.
Yeah, we're starting to see this much more detailed and much harder to detect types of content come online and hit the wire, right? Like, I think a good example is recently people probably saw that song with The Weeknd and Drake that was actually created by an AI.
Exactly. And there was also a Joe Rogan podcast where the AI created his voice and Sam Altman's voice. And like, Joe Rogan should start attesting to podcasts, right? Like, and then you can know for sure that this file that you're listening to has actually been signed off by Joe Rogan. This is going to become extremely important. Like, even I think we used to talk about it in like the 90s, like key signing ceremonies where, like, people actually meet up in person before they like, sign someone or accept someone's, public key into their wallet or whatever, because you can't be sure unless you've actually met the person that it's not a bot or it's some bad actor. So we might have to start bringing that into, like, regular life, where people actually meet in person to do a signature before they actually interact with each other online.
Yeah, we are living in incredibly strange times, and there are some unique problems in front of us. But along with that, I think come, opportunities for unique solutions. So instead of being sort of daunted by these challenges, I think we should be excited by them.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting and scary, but that's just how technology goes. That's
also just life, right?
Yep, exactly. There's a good and a bad.
So, Steve, I know you guys consider EAS. My understanding is like you consider it to be a public good. And I wonder if you could, go into that a little bit and why you consider it that way and why you're building EAS as a public good.
Yeah, so if you want to have a base layer for trust, you can't charge for it. It doesn't make sense. You can't be extracting value from people who use the base layer of something for trust. Because I mean, if we charged for it, like theoretically, someone could just take the smart contracts, copy them, and make a free version, and then people would just use the free version instead. It just makes no sense that a base layer for trust would have some sort of like closed system. So yeah, it's extremely important, and we want all the we don't want to replace identity providers. By the way, we don't want to be the place for identity and reputation. We just want to be a base infrastructure layer for any entity to just attest about anything. And from those attestations, people can aggregate an reputation or identity. But the base layer has to be a public good. It can't have a token. It can't have anything because it can misalign the incentives. And so, we plan to build things on top of EAS that could be profitable eventually, but we are not interested in making EAS the base layer a for-profit company at all. It would not make sense, and it would go against the philosophy of decentralization.
Yeah, it would sort of defeat the purpose, wouldn't it? You'd be right back where you started for if, say, the only people who could prove they are who they say they are the ones who had the means to do it. This should be something anybody can be able to do. And another important point I definitely want to touch on is like the immense power that these legacy tech companies have in a variety of ways, but specifically I'm talking about if you're like a person on, say, Twitter and you build up this following and you're a content creator, and then you get deplatformed for whatever reason, you're really left with little resort, and this time and energy you've spent basically building this identity, right, and building this following, you just have your legs cut out from under you. So there should, in an ideal world, be a way that that's not the case, right? You can take your social circle, if you will, with you wherever you go.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Like your reputations currently are tied to these closed systems. Like, if I'm an eBay seller and I'm really good and I build up a really good reputation with tens of thousands of stars, but now I want to sell something on Amazon or I want to sell something on Craigslist, I have to start from scratch, and that makes no sense. But there's no way for me to prove my identity from eBay to another platform, and it's because these essentially attestations are done in a closed, siloed way. Whereas if like eBay started allowing like the users to attest to each other using some sort of base layer that wasn't just tied to eBay, you'd be able to port your identity and your reputation across multiple platforms, which I think is a much more natural thing. Another one of the things that I don't think we touched on is the idea of just reputation in general between users. Like one thing that I was really interested is like one thing that I was seeing and seeing, you see like Black Mirror episodes about this where there's this like one score that you get from some government, and that's scary. Like this idea that there's some ratings agency and they can rate you a score, and then you're like limited by that score. But that doesn't make sense. That's not how the world works, and that's not natural. We should be able to compute a relative reputation. I should be able to look at, like, for example, if I trust Zain and Zain trusts you, then I should trust you a little bit at least, right? I should trust you a little bit more than nothing. And then if you trust someone else, I should also trust that other person just a little bit. And the idea being that you should be able to have some initial kind of trust set. Like imagine you join the network and you just set trust to your friends, maybe some influencers that you trust. And now anyone within that network, if you look at an entity, you've never seen them before, but they're somehow connected within that network, they should have some sort of like reputation score. And that was probably one of the most interesting things to me. Like, how can you build like a reputation score that's not calculated by some third party, but that you can self-calculate? Because in reality, like our reputations between each other are completely subjective, and that's how it should be if we're going to build a web of trust as well.
Oh, yeah. This is so interesting because it's quite complicated, isn't it? Because a recommendation from one entity is not necessarily equal to that of another. To give an example, like often I find like the best recommendations, whether it be for like movies or books or music, come from people I know quite well. And so I've come to trust their taste or judgment or whatever it may be.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I find this so fascinating. I'm much more likely to take fitness advice from Zain, knowing what I do about him. It's just going to have a higher weight for me.
Right.
And so if we're able to port this and carry it, it's just really interesting, the possibilities there.
And also in different categories too, right? Like, so you might trust Zain for movie recommendations, but maybe you don't trust them for like lawyer recommendations, right? Or maybe you wouldn't trade with him or something like that. We have reputations in different categories, right? And that's like, because EAS allows you to create any kind of schema, any type of attestation type, people can be attesting about whether they like you. They can be the government can be attesting about things. You can be attesting to votes. You can be attesting to tweets, and then other entities can aggregate these attestations and decide based on what matters to them. Like, what is the value of these attestations? Like, if Zain just attests, if someone sends me an attestation, it's just Zain attesting to someone having KYC, I'm not going to care about that. But if I know it's from Coinbase or from somebody who I know is a KYC provider, it's going to hold a lot more weight. And so EAS just allows for all these different, types of attestations to be made, and there's no limit to the types. And because identity is so like meta, you're able to make attestations about completely different things, and then you're able to kind of have reputation scores in different levels. Like, for example, like you might have some guy, just theoretically, who sells drugs on the dark net, right? Maybe he doesn't have any real reputation, no KYC, nothing, right? But other entities who have been KYC'd or who are trusted attest positively to this person because he provides whatever service that he does, and then he's able to have a reputation, at least in the dark market sense, maybe not as a trusted citizen.
Yes. Although, no one speaking here would ever use such a service.
Never.
To be clear. Steve, I want to circle back on something you said. I just want to emphasize sort of the power of this concept, which is that, when you go to one of these new legacy platforms, you have to sort of start over from scratch. For example, like, I use Airbnb a lot, but if I move over to another, rental platform, I have no history there. I have no reviews. And so I have no trust. And so I have to build everything up again from ground zero. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And with this concept of interoperability that you're describing, my understanding is that it's just so much more flexible and powerful because it's not siloed. It's open source, and you can use these powerful identity primitives for a variety of different use cases.
Yeah, like, so imagine you're looking at some entity's reputation. You're not just looking at their eBay reputation. You just care about their reputation their reputation in regards to trading and buying and selling things. You don't care about their reputation about anything else. So imagine there being some like kind of third platform, some other platform that just displays your reputation marks from all these different entities in the space. And so when you look at when you're on eBay, you see the seller, you just click on their username, and it's not just their eBay account. It's all of the things that they've done in regards to buying and selling with other parties. And so you're able to see like, oh, he did this trade on eBay successfully, he did this trade on Craigslist, on Amazon. And then you can kind of aggregate all that and decide for yourself whether or not you want to trade with this person, instead of just looking at only their eBay things or not seeing anything because they're starting from scratch.
Absolutely. And Steve, another thing that I want to circle back on is you brought up this idea that a lot of people are, and I will say even rightfully so, they're sort of skeptical of this because they think it could turn into this sort of dystopian Black Mirror type episode. And I want to hear your sort of take on this. But what I have to say is that, technology is a tool, and it's important that the people building the technology and the tools are thinking about these kind of things, because technology can be steered in whatever direction the creators of that technology want it to go, right? So I think it's important that we all build and embrace technologies that are serving human beings and not subjugating them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important that developers keep like privacy in mind, and that they build, they build things that are interoperable and useful, but also are careful not to put anything that might be private on chain. But yeah, this is what you want.
Yes. Okay. I would like to segue. I would love to hear from Zain on this thing that people may be familiar with. It's called the AttestationStation. Before we move on to that, though, Bryce, if you have anything to add, feel free. If not, Zain, I'd love to hear about the AttestationStation.
Yeah, we'll definitely touch on some of the opportunities. I think the exciting part about EAS is the fact that it can be used for not only human reputations and identity, but also for smart contracts and things that are not human related. So it's going to be really fun and exciting to see the space start attesting to different aspects of a smart contract, maybe a business entity, and start to form reputations around that.
Yeah, a lot of exciting possibilities. But perhaps what's even more exciting is a lot of stuff has already been built and is being built. So I think we'll touch a little on that later. Zain, for those who aren't aware, can you give us like an overview description of what the AttestationStation is?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mac. And actually, before we start there, we'd love to kind of just level set around what the Optimism Collective is doing with public goods, and why we're so excited about attestations and decentralized identity. And then we'll come back to the AttestationStation and EAS. So I implore everyone, if you have a chance, head over to optimism.io/vision to check out what we're building at OP Labs and the broader Optimism Collective. So yes, we're building the Optimism rollup and the protocol, but we're also creating a way to funnel all of that profit back into the ecosystem. So as an example, last year, the Optimism Collective gave over $1 million back to public goods in the ecosystem. This year, the Optimism Collective gave 10 million OP back to over 195 projects in the ecosystem. And that was possible in large part because of reputation and attestations and identity and decentralized identity. So if you have a chance to read over the brief optimistic vision at optimism.io/vision, it talks about this concept of impact equals profit. And all that means is it's a principle that positive impact, whether that's you're opening the door for someone or you're helping onboard someone to Web3 or you're deploying infrastructure that's used throughout the ecosystem, that should be rewarded with profit to the individual. And today, in Web 2 systems, and even historically prior to even Web 2, all of that profit has been centralized and not given back to the community. And what Optimism and the Optimism Collective are trying to do is create a system that allows for all of that value to flow back into the ecosystem. So with that context in mind, last December, we started thinking about this a little deeper and saying, okay, kind of similar to what Steve alluded to, what is identity? How do we start capturing what is people's impact to be able to start funneling all of the ecosystem's profit back to the builders? And we said, okay, well, actually the same through line as Steve, decentralized identity or identity, the substrate or the building blocks of that are just signed messages, just attestations, just statements. So we went to market and we said, hey, let's deploy the simplest implementation of an attestation contract and see if we can just start getting people to opine on what's actually happening in the ecosystem. And in a short 4 months, thanks to incredible teams like OtterSpace, ClickSocial, Flipside, and Rockify, over 500,000 attestations have been issued on Optimism today. So what that means is today there's already a variety of on-chain reputation data that can be used to experiment with. And that attestation data is already integrated into access management tools like Seismo and Guild.xyz, meaning let's say you have an attestation saying that you participated in Optimism governance or that you are a Uniswap contributor. You can now take that attestation and use it in the same way that for token gating. But then there's also the aspect of decentralized identity, which we're super excited about, where series of attestations can then be aggregated to form and understand what is someone's reputation and impact in this space. So I think with that context in mind, we said we were working with a variety of ecosystem builders and trying to build decentralized identity together. And the V0 implementation of what's called the AttestationStation, or just a place to store attestation data on Optimism. We learned it was kind of hard to parse through, those 500,000 attestations and gain the context of what each attestation meant. In addition, it was also like there was no common standard. For example, if I wanted to opine on, whether someone is my friend, maybe I would use one format, but then maybe Steve would use a different format, and maybe Mac would use a different format. And that made it even harder to understand what was actually happening on chain. During this time when we were iterating on potential ways to move forward, we saw EAS had just gone live. I think it was on Sepolia and then Ethereum mainnet, and we said, "Wow, the product that this team has is incredible, right? They already have a schema builder. They already have a no-code way for you to write schemas and make attestations and revoke attestations. It was a public good. They had the ability to revoke it. They had an attestation block explorer, which is just like a way to imagine like Etherscan just for attestations. And we said, wow, this is like an incredible technology, and part of what we're doing with decentralized identity and trying to allow for peer-to-peer identity to emerge, which means it's not just one entity owning what who Zain is, but rather it's a graph of data points. We saw EAS and what they're doing as a great opportunity to really allow the Optimism Collective to really focus on the impact equals profit equation and start using their existing base. So really excited to announce, and we shared this information last week, that we upgraded the AttestationStation to use the EAS Standard and their contracts. And what that means now is whether you're making attestations on Optimism or base mainnet in the future, or Ethereum mainnet, or going anywhere else on the superchain, there is one common standard you can use, and that is an incredible developer tool. Meaning that, whether you're analyzing attestations or issuing attestations, you're able to programmatically understand what the attestation means and really start to use that in use cases, whether that's like simple allow listing, like we see equivalent to token gating, or taking that a step further when it's aggregating series of attestations to inform identity.
Thank you, Zain. That was a fantastic overview. And something that struck me in that story you just gave was this idea of collaboration. I think, depending on what your background is, it might seem strange to people that, instead of building a rivaling product or something that tries to improve upon EAS, we're like, it's amazing what they're doing. We could benefit from it. Let's collaborate. I just love this, how this came together.
Absolutely. And I think sorry to show so many links today, but if you go to blog.oplabs.co, there's an article that our CEO and co-founder Carl made back in December talking about, how the Optimism Collective is planning to experiment using attestations. And from the get-go, we launched that V0 experiment with, I think it was around 10 ecosystem partners. And we're 100% cognizant, similar to what Steve and the EAS team have mentioned, is that if we're going to usher in this primitive of decentralized identity and be able to give power back to the individual, we're going to have to do this together. It's not just one company or project or DAO doing this. It's going to have to collaborate. So if you are at all interested in identity or attestations as a primitive, I highly encourage you to join our collaborators group. The EAS team is phenomenal in sharing a variety of use cases that attestations could be used for, even outside of identity on their documentation. But we're extremely cognizant that if we really want to create this primitive and give power back to the individual and usher in novel use cases like democratic governance, like under-collateralized decentralized finance, like Sybil-resistant gaming, that we're going to have to do it together as an ecosystem. So the data or the base layer is now there, right? And there is a variety of incredible data now available to experiment with. And what we'd love for the ecosystem to start focusing on is now, how do we start using that data? And I can't share too much alpha, but I think in 6 weeks time or so, you're going to see OP Labs shipping something that uses decentralized identity to actually improve exactly what Steve was talking about with creating a better product that uses decentralized identity that is much better than the CAPTCHA experience today. So really excited to show what is possible with the existing attestation data that's available and show how that's a better product and better experience for everyone.
I just want to add on to that, Zain. I love those sentiments. And yeah, it kind of goes back to what Steve and I were talking about earlier of, there's a lot of problems and sometimes they can seem quite immense, but many hands make light work. So, a prime example is this work that's being done in the Optimism ecosystem on identity. But you can also collaborate and contribute to the Optimism Collective in a bunch of other ways if you so choose. So we're just all about this spirit of collaboration. And we think that, together, anything is possible.
I'd also like to add, it's been really refreshing reaching out to different identity service providers in the space, whether it's Gitcoin or others, but just how receptive everyone is to start experimenting with attestations. And what we found is that a lot of people don't want to focus on the infrastructure layer. We've built the base layer, and it allows these builders and people to really start focusing their sites on improving the UI and user experiences around digital identity and focusing on how to build, understand what reputations are possible. And so we'd encourage everyone to reach out to us if you're curious about attestations and how to get started. We've built some really easy tools to do that. So please reach out, but if you're curious about the space as well.
Yeah, and Zain mentioned some of the amazing builders and shippers that have already built some cool stuff. I'm curious for Steve and Bryce, is there anything that you're looking forward to, or anything that you think we'll see come online soon as it relates to identity?
Probably you might start seeing attestations to smart for identity specifically. I think so. Identity is very complex, right? I think, but you'll start to see things like simple attestations where entities are just GMing each other, simple attestations where people are just liking and trusting each other. And then from that, we're working with partners like Karma 3 Labs, which are aggregating on-chain data and attestations to be able to come up with like reputation scores and kind of different scoring in different metrics for different users. So, metrics that show you how like connected you are to somebody, maybe like how many hops away are you in regards to attestations. This stuff I think is really interesting. Entities attesting to KYC, or just even like instead of using tokens for gating, using attestations for gating. We found that like the soulbound token thing for identity isn't really the best solution, since soulbound tokens are just they're full NFT contracts with like arbitrary code, and they're not super standardized, and they're technically because they're NFTs, they can be transferable, and this is not really what you want with identity. The attestation data structure makes, I think, a little bit more sense, since they're time stamped on chain. They have revocability, they have expiration, and all that. So I'm just expecting in the next few weeks, next few months, a bunch of people are building on it. We see Gitcoin is integrating some features, their passport feature using EAS. So we're hoping that they'll have that live soon too. And I think that'll be a pretty big partnership opportunity.
Point of clarification for me, Steve. I thought like your soulbound NFT could potentially have these attestations, but am I thinking about that the wrong way?
So the idea of like the soulbound NFTs, where you'd be issued a soulbound NFT as an attestation, almost as if that soulbound NFT is the attestation, right? But deploying an NFT for this case, it's extra weight for no reason. The attestation actually has everything that you would need. So say, for example, Coinbase attesting to your KYC, they would just create a schema or use a schema that's maybe like has passed KYC true, and they attest true to that. And then now you can go to any smart contract. That smart contract can check that attestation and verify that it was signed by Coinbase. There's no need for an SBT.
Got you. Okay. That's a shame because it is a great name.
A soulbound token. Well, is it really soulbound? Is it really soulbound if I can sell you my key?
Yeah. Well, and if you believe in the concept of reincarnation, I mean, am I going to have this in the next life?
Exactly.
Take them with you.
Yeah.
And In addition to a lot of the identity use cases, we're really getting excited about just what devs are experimenting around just for voting systems. Devfolio and the ETH India team, they were able to create a quadratic voting system for their hackathon. We're starting to see people experimenting around ticketing, smart contract reputations, content authenticity, as we talked about at the top of this. So the use cases are there's a ton of use cases that you can start experimenting with, but for us to be successful, we have to work together. And the more attestations around identity that are happening, on the AttestationStation with EAS, the closer we can get to more Sybil resistant platforms and really start to make an improvement on digital identities.
Right. You want to have as rich a sort of data set here as possible, but to make it more robust.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, guys, I feel like we're kind of winding down here. This has been absolutely fascinating. What a group of interesting people and what an interesting conversation. Before we close this out, is there anything anybody would like to add?
I would just say check out test.sh and easscan.com if you want to have a look at what we have. There's a lot of cool tools that are really made for anyone to really use. It's super easy. You don't need an account or anything. You can just start creating schemas and attesting right away. We even built a cool content hash schema where you can just drag in any file. It automatically hashes the file and you can attest to it on chain. We also have schemas for attesting to private data, like infinite amounts of private data where you can own the data and selectively reveal parts of that data without using ZK proofs and being able to do it instantly without any hardcore computation and still extremely privately. So we're just continually building tools for devs to be able to attest about anything privately and publicly. And just check out the site, keep up to date with us, follow us on Twitter, follow me on Twitter. And yeah, Bryce, go ahead.
I'd also recommend, we built a really nice way to get introduced to attestations on the Optimism Gorley EAS scan, which is essentially the Ether scan for attestations. We can post about this after, but if you go to optimism-gorley.easscan.org, there's a learn section that walks you through what attestations are, how it's being used within the OP collective, and it helps you make your first attestation. It's a great way to get introduced. And then through that, you also see some of the no-code tools that we've built. EAS, as we mentioned, is a public good, and that means we want to be accessible and inclusive for all types of individuals, technical and non-technical. So you'll see on our Explorer that we've built a ton of tools to help bridge the gap between what are attestations to actually starting to use them.
There you have it, guys. And here's a call to arms to anybody listening. Go get started building if you're a dev. Let's see that hot tub attestation. I want to see that.
Who was there?
And once again, a lot of the topics of this conversation can be found in this blog post published by OP Labs recently. So once again, that URL is blog.oplabs.co, and it's the most recent post. So you'll see it right up there. Zain, anything you'd like to add before we bid everybody adieu?
No, thank you so much for everyone joining wherever you are in the world. Like we've said, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to do this together as a community, as an ecosystem. So we're super excited to leverage some of the incredible tools that the EAS team has built, as well as try and start ushering in novel use cases like democratic voting. So excited to catch y'all on Twitter or Telegram or Discord, but let's build together.
Here. Yeah, step by step and together, anything is possible. So yeah, thanks once again, everybody. This has been fantastic, and hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll see y'all on the internet.
Thanks, Mac.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Build.